Welcome back to Great Lakes Junction, everyone. We've got to do some more work on the 65 Ford today. We have a modulator valve that's dripping a little bit of transmission fluid from it, and we changed it some time ago. The old one had a rubber diaphragm and it was gone, and the fluid was leaking out of the vacuum line that attaches to it. So we got a new modulator valve for it, took the old one out, put the new one in. I'm not sure if we got it right tight. I'll show you in the manual for this. It actually has measurements to grind down a wrench to fit. So we want 3/16 of an inch thick. We're grinding away the gray shaded material and the tips off of the wrench so that it'll fit in. It's such a tight spot to tighten that modulator valve up. So they recommend using this snap-on one, and you would put a 3/8 drive ratchet into it. I don't have that kind of a wrench head, so I just got an old wrench that was 3/4 of an inch, ground the tips off, and I've ground it down so it's down to the right thickness. They want 3/16 of an inch thick. For my caliper, digital caliper, that's 0.1875 on your digital caliper. So I've got the wrench ground down. I didn't have it ground down quite enough, so it's possible that it's just not tight enough and that's why it's leaking. But there was no gasket material that came with the new one, and it didn't appear to be any old gasket material come off the old one I took out. So I didn't think they had a gasket in it, but I'm going to go ahead this time. I've got some gasket paper here that will withstand the transmission fluid and stuff, and it's very thin. It's not going to make much of a difference for the position of the modulator valve once it's installed. So we're going to make our own gasket up and then put it back in. So we've already got the car jacked up on axle stands, and I'll go under here and I'll show you where this is on the transmission. So here's your main cross member that the transmission sits on, and that shiny piece back in there with the blue line on it, that's the modulator valve. And I'll get into a position here. This is just the speedometer cable here, but there's the vacuum line that attaches to the end of it. There's another position I'll move into here, and you can see where the nut portion of that is that you have to get to. Right up in there. So you can see the modulator valve with the blue line on it, and on the face of that there is a nut there that's up against the housing, and that's the nut you have to get at. So I can reach in this way with just a standard wrench that's ground down to fit in there. The special one that they mention having probably would make the job easier. So I've got my drain pan cleaned out. I'm going to take that modulator valve out first, and transmission fluid will run out of that hole. So I'm going to let that drain down as much as it wants to into the drain pan. When it stops running, then I'll get a gasket made up and we'll reassemble it, and hopefully that'll take care of our drip. So I'm just holding that there. It's unthreaded, and you can see maybe their transmission fluid running down into my drain pan. I don't want to pull it out all the way, or the fluid will run out of there so fast it'll just land on that cross member piece and it'll run all over the place. So I'm just going to stay here like this for a bit until the flow of it diminishes to where I can take this out completely. If you're going to reuse your fluid, make sure your drain pan's cleaned out well first. You don't want to add any foreign material back into the system. Oh, got a little carried away there. Took it out too far. Alright, you get the idea. So I'm going to thread that back in a little bit to stop it a bit, and just let it drain some on its own. So when it stops draining, then I'll just take it out completely, make a gasket, and put it back in. Okay, so there's our modulator valve, and there's a little gasket that I made up out of the gasket paper that I had. So it's not perfectly round, but that's going to be fine. So when we tighten that back up in there, hopefully that's going to stop our transmission drip that we had, and we have a couple of other things to do to the car. Okay, so we got our modulator valve back in. I had to cut, I'll show you, I cut the other end of this wrench off. I could get in there where I showed you, but to try and turn it, the other end of this wrench just kept hitting the floor. Didn't matter which way you turned the wrench, it was always in the way, so we just cut it off. So now we have a very specialized tool. We'll put that in our toolbox specifically for this vehicle. So we have that done. The only other thing, so this vacuum line that goes on the end of this module, there is a clip right back in here. I know it's just out of view. There's a bolt right back there. So you'll have to take that bolt out so that you can pull that line off of there. So I just have to put that bolt back in now, and we'll put the fluid back in. There's other things we said we wanted to do, so I don't want to start the car and heat it up yet to see if that fluid's going to leak, but we will. Okay, our modulator valve's done. We got our fluid poured back into it now. We don't see any signs of leaking underneath there. It's not dripping from it at the moment. Once we warm things up and the oil gets a little thinner, we'll check again and make sure we don't have any leaks under. But before we get things too hot to work on, now the next one we're going to move on to is the oil leak. Same thing, drain plug in the oil pan's dripping a little bit, so we're going to make the same kind of a gasket. But before we can do that, another issue we've always wanted to take care of, there's a sticky lifter in this car, and when it gets hot, you can hear the ticking noise from it because it's sticking. So I had a friend with another old vehicle, and he recommended using a product called Reslone. It's an engine cleaning product they have, and it's supposed to clean out varnishes that build up on things like that. I couldn't find the Reslone brand, but I did find another brand of the same type of material. So first thing we need to do, they tell us on there, is to warm the engine up first. Then we're going to drain a little bit of oil out of it just so there's enough to fit that bottle of product in it. And we got to run the engine for 5 minutes till it's warmed right up, and then drain it completely out and do an oil change on it. So we've got everything we need to do it. We just got to get at it. So we took the drain plug out of the oil pan, and it has kind of a nylon washer on here. It's dried out, it's hard, it's cracked. So I think this is where it was dripping from all the time. So I'm going to try and pry this off of here, and we'll make a new gasket up for it ourselves. So there's our circle for our bolt. We put that on the steel anvil part of the vise and just used a 3/8 socket, hammered it on there until it just cut right through, so we have a nice hole. So the threaded portion of our bolt is a perfect match. So now we just got to trim the rest of that gasket off. And we have our new gasket for our bolt now. So we're going to let this sit and make sure it's well drained to get all that engine flush material out. And we'll put this back in, change the filter, fill it back up. Hopefully we've taken care of another leak and possibly another issue with that sticky lifter, I hope. So we've taken care of the oil leak that we had for the drain plug in the oil pan. We took care of the transmission leak, we hope, from the modulator valve that was leaking. We ran the engine cleaner through. We have not had a chance yet to run the car, warm everything all up, see if it's quieted down, see if the leaks have stopped. But we're moving on to our last leak, and this is an exhaust manifold leak. So this exhaust manifold down here, the bolts kept wanting to come loose. They wouldn't stay tight on it. So we took out one end bolt just so we could match up size. We went and bought 8 new bolts and washers for it. So we're going to take this off, pull the gasket out. I think it's burnt a hole out this end of the gasket down at this end. And I don't have a new set of gaskets at this time to put in. So I'm going to use some high heat silicone. Just to try and patch up this gasket and put it back in. So this is the last of the leaks that we have to try and solve. Some of the bolts are difficult to get at. So the 4 on top is just that one, and that one, and the one at the end down here. So those are relatively easy. The one that's underneath this front corner isn't too bad. You can feel it under here, and you got some room to work in here with a ratchet and stuff. The other 3 that are on the bottom you have to do from underneath. And I can't recall, it's been a while since I've worked on that area, but I do believe it involved a swivel and some extensions and whatnot to get at them. So we'll get those out and then we'll come back. Sometimes I don't know how detailed to make these videos. So I'm under the car now, looking up, coming in from under the front bumper. So there's the first one that I said was easy to get at. From up above, you had enough room, you could feel that and you could work at it. The second one, if I can get it in here, there's the empty hole. I've already taken the bolt out. So I did use a swivel on the end of a socket and a long extension to get me down past the cross member and stuff in here so that my knuckles weren't banging up against anything being up in there too close. So that's the second one from the front of the engine back on the bottom. Now the third one, this is, it's tough to see, but this is the front cross member that comes across under the oil pan. There's our drain plug in our oil pan that was leaking, then we cut a gasket for that. So we need to get behind that cross member. I'll see if I can get myself back here. Apologize for this being so dark. So what you're looking at that the flashlight is shining on, that's the starter. There's a live cable on the side of it, so that's the end of the starter there. Just to give you an idea where we are. And there's our third bolt back from the front that's up there. So again, with a swivel and an extension to reach up in there, you know, it's in the open, it's fairly easy to get at. So we'll take that one out next. Okay, so the last bolt on the bottom is that guy right there. This is definitely a trickier one to get at. Now, if you undid this exhaust pipe and pulled it out of your way, it would probably make it a little bit easier, but I don't want to undo this pipe. It's not a factory exhaust system on here. Dual exhaust was added, and whoever did it, some of the bends in this pipe aren't exactly as they should have been. So we've had some trouble in the past getting that to seal up. So I don't really want to undo those bolts. So again, with some swivels and stuff in there, I think I can get at it, but that is definitely the tough one. Now I'm coming into this from the other side, so I'm behind the front wheel of the car, coming into it from that side. So this is the exhaust pipe coming from the rear of the car, coming up to that manifold. Just to give you an idea of whereabouts I'm laying under the car now so that you can see it. This, of course, would be a lot easier if you had an actual garage and a hoist and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, you could have the thing as high as you need it to be to stand under it and get at these things. That would certainly make it easier, but now I cannot hold the camera in this position and do this at the same time, so I'm going to have to turn the camera off and come back later. All right, we got that bottom one out. So all we have left now are these 3 on top, and they're easy to get at. We have this one, and another one hiding under here. So we'll take those last 3 out. Now, when you're doing this, I don't know if the original gaskets would have had all 8 holes as round holes right through the gasket or not. This was a replacement gasket once already. And the bottom 2 bolts, that one that was really tough to get at the back and the one on the bottom at the front, the gasket itself is slotted so that you don't have to remove the manifold. You just need to loosen it off and get it to separate away from the block, and that gasket will slide out, which is really nice, because if you were replacing these and you had that style of gasket where those end ones are slotted, you'd start those 2 bolts, which I've already started the new ones in place, and you can just drop the new gasket in. It'll rest on them and all your other holes are lined up. So it's nice that way. Here's one of the other previous ones that we had taken out. So you can see how that hole is slotted compared to these other ones that are just round holes right through it. So there's the slotted one on the other end. So those will just slide down in there. They'll rest on those corner bolts on the bottom, and it'll keep everything in place and lined up. So as I said, this side is the only side that we've had an issue with the bolts continuing to come loose and leaking. So we did buy a set of replacement gasket once. This was the first one we had put in, and you can see what happens when they come loose. The pressure from the exhaust, whatever this coating is, it burnt it off or blew it off right around this exhaust port here, and that's where this one had an exhaust leak. So we took it out, we put the second one in that we had from the set, and now it's done the same thing again. So rather than just buying another set of gaskets, so I'm just using some of that high temp silicone this time. So we'll take one out, put some silicone on it, drop it back in there. So this is the one we just took out of the car now. So we can see if we get in closer where it's burnt the material off of the gasket down here, and there's pretty much no material left all the way around the end of that port. And it's burned all this off, and you can see how heavy the black soot is there. It was definitely leaking exhaust out there out of the back of the manifold. So that's the one we just took out. The one that previously that was in there before that we took out, we're still good on the first 2 exhaust ports. This one has a bit of material burned off the side here and down here, and that one still looks good. So this is by far the better of the 2 gaskets. So we'll just put a little bit of high temp silicone in these areas, and we'll put this gasket back in instead. Well, I think we're done. Got her all back together now. It's been several months this car has been sitting since it's been started, so I'm sure it'll take a little bit of turning over to get fuel pumped up in it to get it running, but we're going to start it up. We'll let things warm up, thin out that oil, transmission fluid, see if we have any leaks. There were a couple of oil stains on the floor of the garage from where it had been dripping before, so I've put a clean piece of plywood that I had underneath there, so there's no oil stains on the plywood. So if things start to drip or whatever, even after it's been shut off and let sit out here for a while, I can come back and check later and see if there was any leaks. And we'll see if our exhaust leak is quieted down on us. We'll see how everything turned out. So I'm going to let this run and warm up. I think my exhaust leak is still there. I can still hear it. I only put silicone in the areas of the gasket that were bad. Maybe I should have done the whole thing. Let's hope I had better luck with my oil leak and my transmission leak. Okay, we shut it off so that you can hear me talking. I know it's a little loud when this thing is running. So as I had said when I was going to start it, it's been several months now since it's run. So I went out with the riding lawnmower and I got some gas out of that, and I was pouring it right in the carburetor. She likes a big drink to get going. So that got us fired up, brought the fuel up so it would stay running. So we've let it warm up to full operating temperature, and I let it continue to run for 10 minutes. I checked my plywood underneath. There's no drips from the oil pan plug that we put a gasket on or from the modulator valve in the transmission, but there is one little drip on the plywood, not in either of those areas. And it's not in an area where there is anything to leak, unless the actual oil pan gasket itself is leaking at the back of the pan or something. So I think what I'll do is I'll dry everything off underneath really good. Maybe when the weather's better, I'll take it outside and spray some engine degreaser under there and really clean it up good. Make sure it's not some residual fluids that, you know, when the oil pan was leaking around the plug and you're driving, it may blow some oil back onto the cross members and stuff, and it could be just some of that residual oil that's dripping. So we'll make sure we clean it up good, and we'll check that. Our exhaust leak, no difference. I'm not happy with it at all, so I'm going to go back to that again another time. Now, we put the engine cleaner through, and I think it made a big difference. Normally when it was up to this temperature running, you'd hear that sticky lifter that I had, you'd hear it ticking quite loudly. And there is some ticking sound, but I think the majority of it is actually the exhaust leak that I'm hearing. Because an exhaust leak can give you a false sense of what it is that's making the noise. And quite often it will sound like a lifter or something like that that's stuck and it's got a ticking noise to it, and it's just an exhaust leak. So after we fix the exhaust leak again, I think we're going to be good to go. I don't know if car shows will be back on this year or not. We are getting towards the spring of 2022 now. So if there are any car shows this summer, it'll be 3 years since this car has been out of this garage to go anywhere. I think we did a couple of parades around town. They had one for the kids when they were graduating school and they couldn't have a graduation at their schools. They did a parade around town for that. And we had a Canada Day parade also during COVID, so we put it in that parade and drove around town for that. But that's the only 2 times it's been out since everything started. You know, so just to wrap up, I'm really happy with that engine cleaning product that we put through there. Definitely made a difference for sure on how much this thing was ticking when it was warmed up. So let's close this video out here. Once again, thank you very much for watching.